welcome everybody. There's a nice group of you kind of logging in, and hopefully a few more people will join us. Um, this session is going to be recorded, and it is going to form a bit of an evergreen resource that is part of a continuous learning, but also capturing our journey as part of LocalMotion Lincoln. So we can look back on it and realise where we were at a significant point in time, and little milestones that we're kind of building into our local plan. If you have logged into the right webinar, you're here to hear more about Lincoln's big conversation, specifically some of the resources and the insights that have come from the 2025 Community and Culture Deeper Dive Big Conversation, but also there will be a bit of a wider context about the big conversation and why we do it, and what some of our plans are for the future as well. This is about how we're continuously learning. So this webinar is a bit of an experiment. We've not done this before. And Daisy and I were just saying, actually, we do feel a little bit nervous, a little bit on the edge a little bit. This is about how we're immersing people in the learning on a regular basis, rather than kind of waiting for those to dark or sort of moments before then going out and sharing what we're learning. And that's really important to us in Lincoln, that we bring more people into it. So this is just part of that experiment. Obviously, the recording will be available afterwards, and it will be made available on our website, so you can share it with other people that wanted to be here today but haven't been able to. Any questions and comments we're going to leave till the end, if that's okay. Obviously, you can use the chat function at any point, and then just towards the end, we will just go through them and try and respond to as many as we can as possible. Right, okay, we'll kick off. So those of you that don't know me, I'm Charlotte Brooks. I am the systems tamer of Lincoln under the umbrella of LocalMotion Lincoln. I first came into contact with the LocalMotion in April 2020, which if we all remember where we were at that point, you'll remember, you'll kind of recognise how long it's been and how much has happened over that period of time. I'll let Daisy give a little wave. So this is Daisy Graham from Social Change. She is a local group member, but doesn't have a vote necessarily. She's very much an influencing and supportive learning voice within the group, working with Social Change on a few little bits and pieces that we're doing around that continuous learning, listening, and engagement with communities. Does that feel about right, Daisy?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, then we'll jump in. So, LocalMotion Lincoln's mission is to connect people to inspire a flourishing future. Now, I will say that's our mission statement at the moment, as part of a as we're approaching our midpoint in the programme. We're doing a very comprehensive local plan review, which is running from October 25, and then we think probably will be complete in June 26. So that might change, but actually I still feel very much connected to that mission statement, and I know a lot of our local group do as well. Next slide, please, Daisy. So if I take you right back to the very beginning, to where this all started. So the big conversation is part of a series of activities that we do in response to some really early listening in communities around Lincoln. It is predominantly a survey, but it is more than a survey as well. And that's the reason why we call it the conversation, because we're experimenting with ways of how this sort of way of researching, I suppose, can turn more into a conversational piece rather than a really hard survey approach, which traditionally is what people told us they was turning them off from engaging with certain bits and pieces. Communities felt like they weren't heard through those processes. They felt like they were full of tick boxes. People didn't know how decisions were being made, and they felt really disconnected with actually when they gave information, how that information was used, and how did it influence potentially what came out of it. There just seemed to be a lot of confusion and fractured relationship between that person that was filling it in and then actually what came out of it. Research felt quite disconnected and not very open. A lot of it was described to me as it tended to be to the agenda of the organization or the person that was asking it, usually to justify that person's existence or service. So almost validating what they were offering rather than being really open and part of a wider piece of work. And research felt to be quite one-off. So there would be a lot of kind of scattergun approaches, lots of things that would be coming out all at the same time. People didn't really know what they were responding to or what was most important to them to respond to. And it just felt really disconnected just generally. Next slide, Daisy, I think. Just going on some of the other local voices that we heard. Some of the success of research was felt to be around the big numbers in terms of participation rather than the quality of the actual research and some of the insights. And I was in rooms really early on where certain bits of research I thought were fascinating, little snippets into life in Lincoln, but were quite dismissed by people and organisations because they didn't have the big participation number at the start, which I thought was quite interesting. People feel very survey tired. The survey fatigue and engagement fatigue is real, and we were definitely feeling that in Lincoln. And that was something that was quite loud when we were listening to other people. People were a bit worried about being judged, even on anonymous surveys, and I always found that quite fascinating. That even with the anonymity that maybe a survey would offer, people felt like they should respond in a certain way, and they wanted to be part of something a bit bigger. So that's kind of where the big conversation started. Next slide, Daisy. This is going back to our really early version of our local plan. We have 4 themes initially in our local plan, and they were around community-led prosperity, community-led aspiration, community-led sustainability, and community-led impact and evaluation. The main driver behind this one was, how do we know we're making a difference? And who should define the success of LocalMotion? However we're defining success, who should then decide if we have been successful or not? And it shouldn't be me, obviously. I don't think it should be our funders or people in our local group. It should be the people that live, work, and study in Lincoln. There were some things around storytelling that came out a lot in Lincoln, and people wanted to feel part of something much bigger, wanted to feel like they were part of something that was really, really big. So how could we use a vehicle, something like the Big Conversation, to tell a story of Lincoln and its people and what was happening to us and how we were shifting and changing over a long period of time? So within the Big Conversation, there are some fixed kind of things that we ask fairly the same year in, year out. And then there's obviously a change in theme. So the first one that we did was around prosperity, and it was very much about dipping our toe in the water. Because of everything that we'd heard, how are we starting to build that trust and prove that we were a bit different with anybody that was responding? And some really lovely things came out of that then helped shape some of the bits of work. Then we went into community and culture. I think we could have had a survey that was huge and colossal, couldn't we, Daisy, in 2024? So we decided to do community and culture over a 2-year period. So the first one was very much light touch, but focused on community. And the other one was a bit of a deeper dive and went into more the culture side of things. Daisy will touch on that in more detail, but the idea was kind of came from, did we even know who Lincoln was at the moment? Because there are so many global and local movements and influences that are changing our culture. Did we really know who we were talking to anymore? And that's kind of part of the work that we've been doing at the moment. The Big Conversation is an annual thing. That doesn't mean to say it happens at the same time each year. And we might touch a little bit on that. We've tried different touch points in the year. We think, but it's not tried and tested yet, we think that spring, people feel a bit more open to participating in engagement activities. So we are ploughing ahead with our 2026 survey, which we'll touch on at the end. And it is really about how we're telling a bigger story over a long period of time. So next year, in 2027, I have to check my years where I am. In 2027, not only will we be doing another Big Conversation, But we're going to take that as a point to kind of go, okay, what have we learned collectively over the last 4 years? And we'll be working with Daisy and the team to really understand the shifts and changes over a long period of time that are happening in Lincoln and where then we want to go next, which will obviously then support the local plan review as well. Daisy, anything that you think I've missed?
I don't think so. I think that's quite a good overview of what we're looking to do.
Oh, thank you very much. I will hand over to you then, I think, Daisy.
Yeah. So as Charlotte mentioned, so I work for a company called Social Change, and we are a social research and marketing agency. We use behavioural science in everything we do to understand behaviour and how it can best be changed. And as a certified B Corp, it's very much in our ethos to do good for people and planet. And we've been working with Charlotte and LocalMotion Lincoln since late 2022, early 2023, I think. As mentioned, I am part of the core group with that voice, but also we've been running this big Lincoln conversation year on year. And as Charlotte mentioned, this is very much an annual survey, just wanting to understand the experiences of those living and or working in the city of Lincoln. So we want to know what local barriers and challenges exist, what people's happiness and satisfaction levels are, and really understand what impacts them and what may be stopping communities from thriving, and understand what kind of things would help. And as mentioned, over the years, we've had a few consistencies. So, for example, measuring happiness levels and satisfaction across various aspects of life. We've been doing that year on year so that eventually we can benchmark how that's changed over time as well. And part of that work next year, we'll be really looking at how have sort of national and international contexts really influenced and shaped that as well. And we've also been looking every year at the degree people feel able to control different aspects of their lives and also what they feel impacts them. So that avenue has been really interesting because we've explored what they worry about versus what actually impacts them as well. And there are a few consistent themes that have come up, but in the latest big conversation 2025, we took a bit of a different approach, which I'll go through as well. So just to take you as kind of an overview of each big conversation, the full reports are available. So for the big conversation 2023, as Charlotte mentioned, it was that initial toe in the water, no hidden agenda, just wanting to know more about people's lives, what impacts them, what they see as success, what they see as thriving and aspiration. And to share that, we had both digital and print copies of the survey. So we promoted that through social media advertising, and we shared printed surveys with local stakeholders as well. So we have a few takeaways kind of on the screen now, but to give you a bit more of an in-depth picture of the key findings and themes. So we had over 800 people take part in the first year, so starting off really strong, and found that around 3/4 of people had positive happiness and satisfaction scores. However, when looking at how this varies across different demographics, we found that there is an association with income and education level. So where they are perhaps lower, happiness and satisfaction levels seem to also be lower as well. So that was an interesting association. And when looking at it across the lifetime, we found that older adults, so those aged 65 and over, tended to show to have some of the highest happiness and satisfaction scores. And where there were more open qualitative questions, we found a lot of commentary around being grateful for another day, wanting to make the most of the day or their life in good and the time in good health. And it really showed that at this point, people begin to view time or time in good health as quite scarce. And behaviorally, the scarcity principle suggests the less that something is available, the more desirable it is. So, for example, the example that I quite like is flights between New York and London. They were cut in half, and all of a sudden sales went up because they were seen less available. Therefore, everyone needed a piece of that. So it's almost as if at this older adult stage, they're viewing time as scarce. So they're wanting to make the most of it and having that shift in perspective. When thinking about what impacts these scores, people really talked about cost of living, high demand and waiting times with the NHS and struggle to get health appointments, and also the political climate. they were seen as the main things that people feel like are impacting them and are actually pushing them into a sort of survival mode thinking, where they're not really able to focus on connection, purpose, and community because they're just trying to get through. And that's almost kind of a lead on from the COVID-19 pandemic, where I think even today we're still feeling some impacts as a result of that as well. So during 2023, that was particularly prevalent. So thinking about what people place importance on throughout the lifetime, health, family, and happiness were always the top three. The order at which throughout different life stages varied. For some, health was more important. And then for some, for example, people who have started families, have children, found that happiness was most important, family, sorry, was most important of all. And if we take the role of family, we found for younger adults, the focus was more on building a family and starting that family, then to middle age, which was more around providing, making sure that they've got a steady income for their family. And then later in life, it was more of a focus about avoiding loneliness and keeping that connection with family. Additionally, what people prioritize is work, but for very different reasons. So for many, it's just a way to survive and pay the bills. It's a steady income. It helps with their security. But for others, it provides a sense of purpose and a route towards thriving. People really talked about they were in jobs that they loved, they were on the career path they really wanted, and that gave them a sense of purpose in life. So when we did our behavioural science analysis of all this, we brought in Maslow's hierarchy of needs and really found that the basic needs, the basic safety needs, such as money, health, security, they seemed very at risk at that moment in time. So people were really stuck in that survival mode and unable to think about those social belonging needs and that purposeful esteem needs. So when we explored, well, how can we help? What kind of recommendations do we put forward? It was very much on focusing on helping people take that step from survival to thriving. So practical resources around money, health, time, using community hubs and champions to advocate supporting for one another, and stories from others with tips and tricks on how to support these worrisome areas, really looking to provide that more headspace for them to then start thinking about connection and purpose. They've built security in their core safety needs, so now they can look beyond. So moving on to 2024. So as Charlotte mentioned, that year was mainly focused on community. So wanting to understand what people's perceptions of community are. We typically always talk about geographical location, you know, our neighborhoods are our communities, but we're in a very digital age. So actually your community could actually be people halfway across the world, for example, if it's an online community or a gaming community. So we really wanted to explore what this meant for people and, importantly, whether the city of Lincoln is actually seen as welcoming. So we adopted the similar survey dissemination techniques, but this year we also opted to make the survey available. I think it was around 10 languages, so that there was opportunity for everyone to complete it. And again, these were printed and available digitally as well. We did find, and we'll touch on this in a bit of a learning section we've got at the end, we did find that actually this did not drive lots more responses, which highlighted that there perhaps is another reason people aren't fully engaging with research beyond having the means to do so. So alongside the key takeaways that I've got on the screen here, so this year around 300 people responded, and we found that there had been an increase with happiness and satisfaction levels compared to the previous year, with now around 4 in 5 respondents reporting positive scores, which is around a 15% increase. Looking at the ages, we found that younger adults, so aged 16 to 24, tended to be the least likely to have positive scores. And the thought behind that was just starting out in life, starting a new career, looking to make their own pathway, which is why satisfaction might not be as higher a level as people later on. We also found that those aged 55 to 64 actually had the highest level of satisfaction across all the age groups as well, which was really interesting, but the 65 plus were still quite high. So in terms of what impacts, it continues to be the NHS and economic situations. And again, the political climate, people are increasingly thinking about this, increasingly getting worried. So how do people define community? It was very much through locality. So there is that geographical element there, but also friendship and shared interests. So people want to feel a part of a group that includes people like me. So whether that's because they live in the same area as me, they are like-minded people, or they have a similar interest to me, that all helps that sense of belonging. And for that community to be welcoming, it needs to be fair, inclusive, and have good communication. If people go to join a particular club or group, look to join a community that actually feels like they're an outsider, there's cliques and they don't talk to each other very well, that's going to be very disencouraging, make them feel excluded, then ultimately disengage from that community. So as part of this, we wanted to know whether people see the city of Lincoln as welcoming. And while over 90% want Lincoln to be welcoming, actually only around half of people felt it was. So there are those issues where people may feel like outsiders, excluded, or don't have those positive connections within their communities as well. And interestingly, there's lower perceptions that people weren't sure that Lincoln is welcoming, were also more likely to have negative happiness and satisfaction scores. So that indicates that happiness and satisfaction is very much linked with that sense of belonging and community connection as well. And that helps to promote people's well-being overall as well. So recommendations this year, we're very much focusing on how we can strengthen those networks and also signpost people to local clubs, groups, events, using those champions to help people build bridges with one another and really improving that perspective of community overall by actually giving them a means to build one as well. So now we move on to 2025, and as Charlotte mentioned, we split out the community and culture focus. So last year we very much focused on culture. So we had several different dimensions where we wanted to see whether people were kind of this or that and what their preferences were in terms of the role they can take with change, how they want to be communicated to, their perceived level of influence and the way they live their lives around rules and structure and that sort of thing. And again, we shared through digital and print modes. We did not proceed with the languages in 2025, but as always, if someone does need surveys in alternative format, there is a contact to reach out so we can provide that. And we also promoted via the Lincoln Independent print and website as well, so really maximising that reach. So this year, 150 people took part. And yes, that is a drop from previous years, which is a learning that we'll come on to after going through the insights. So interestingly, we found that last year there was quite a drop in happiness and satisfaction scores. So where this had been around 75 to 80% had positive scores, we were now looking at between 65 and 67% having those positive scores. And negative scores seem to be more prevalent as well. So that's really interesting to see that shift. And as part of that shift, whilst the 55 to 64-year-old age were still among the most positive, that over 65 age group, who in 2023 had the highest scores, in 2025 they had some of the lowest and some of the more negative scores, which was a really interesting shift to see. And there's perhaps a number of reasons that are behind this. And, we've toyed with the idea of using community researchers to really tease in a little bit more, have those qualitative conversations. But for 2025, when we asked people what impacts them, traditionally we had kind of closed questions with a few options they could pick on. I think we say pick the top 3 things that impact you. However, last year we thought, let's keep it open. Let's have this open space where people can, in their words, describe what's impacting them. And actually, let's not just have it as what's negatively impacting them. Let's find out what positively impacts them as well. So we got some more richer insight as well to help direct our next few years with the big conversation. So in terms of what's impacting the scores, the first theme was around security. So thinking about employment, income, housing, health, safety, social, their secure sense of security in these areas, if they feel secure and that they have that, that has a positive impact. But if they don't, then it's the other way around. And having opportunities for connection to help build that social security was also a key driver. However, this can sometimes be limited by a perceived lack of infrastructure, such as transport or local spaces to help make that happen. So that social connection is a massive, massive driver of happiness and satisfaction scores, but is actually also a growing concern. So people, whilst they had networks and what they considered their community, whether due to family, friends, or local clubs and groups, there was actually a lot of concern around rising tensions across society as a whole, and they felt like disconnection is increasing and they're just worried about that social safety as well. So that was really interesting to explore. And thinking about what people feel able to make a change in their life, around 70 to 75% felt able to make a change to their health and social life. So immediately those two areas that impact them, on the other side, they feel that they can make a change to those areas should they wish. So that's positive to see. However, when thinking about that employment and income security, these are areas where people feel less able to make a change. And that kind of links back with previous conversations where, while some people saw work as purpose, others saw it as a means to get by and as a way to have that income, and that they needed that income in order to be secure. Another theme that came out was around the political climate. So people felt that, similar to the social connection, there's rising tensions in this area. And actually, nearly 60% do not feel able to make a change to the political climate. And that's particularly concerning when considering actually, by being able to make a change to political climate, this can have knock-on effects with social security, employment, income, all of the things that impact them can be somewhat influenced by that political climate as well. So that was really interesting to see. So in this kind of first half of the big conversation 2025, the findings, it really showed that people want to feel in control. When they lack that perception of control, it has that negative impact on happiness and satisfaction. But actually, social connection, which we know from 2024 is really important, is actually harder than ever because people are increasingly concerned about how they will be perceived and how they will be treated. And then there's across society increasing negativity, for example, in media, that kind of compounds these issues and makes it even more worrisome. So in terms of the recommendations put forward, it's very much around rebuilding that control and cohesion, reframing systems and communications, having directories of support that people can go to find information, guidance and advice, and also showing examples of positive connection in Lincoln, showing it does happen, it is out there, and strengthening kind of local boards and feedback loops. So making sure people know what's happening in their area, they know what's happening to them, and importantly, they know what opportunities they do have. So the second half of Big Convo 2025 was around these cultural dimensions. So the idea of this was to really understand how people see their role and thinking about if they were to take community action, what would encourage them? What would they need to support this? In terms of their ability to actually take action, we found a large portion of people had an internal sense of control. So they felt that they could make a change, they could act if they wanted to. However, there is a small group whose locus of control is more externally controlled. So they think outside influences impact their lives and that they don't have full control over that. And then that is linked to lower happiness and satisfaction. So there's a degree to there's a need to build that control to a degree, make people feel like they can take action before encouraging them to do so. Then thinking how we can motivate people to take action. So one of the dimensions under this was individualism and communitarianism. Individualism is very much focused where people think about their role for themselves and the things that they can do. whereas communitarianism is very much their role within the community and as a part of the community. So we found that there was quite a split. There was slightly more portion of people lean towards an individualist mindset. And this just means that for some people, messages saying what you can do that helps you and also your community would work. But then for others, it's what we can do together and as a community, how you can support your community. So it's almost that me first, community second, and community first, me second. In terms of how to communicate, in terms of showing what action can be taken and the impact of that, preferences largely lean towards direct, factual, objective information. So telling people what, how, when, where, why, the impact it has, so that they can make their own decision. However, there are some people who like the immersive, story-based, relationship-led approach. So much more connection, showing the lives of people who have been impacted by action and making that emotional connection. So needing that healthy mix of the two. And then in terms of supporting people to take action, so interestingly, we had an almost even split. Some people prefer clear plans and structure, so they want a process to follow and they will follow that to a T. However, a similar amount of people want flexibility. They would like a framework that they can follow, but actually they want to know that they can adapt and be flexible how they need. So while one has safety and security and control, structure, rigid processes, others find safety and security in being able to step away from that as and when they need to. So there is that balance of understanding how we can appeal to both groups and giving both those kind of different opportunities to fit their needs. So based on these cultural dimensions, we put forward recommendations using factual and story-based messaging, talking about what individuals can do and also what communities can do together, and establishing systems that, if needed, can be rigid, but if not, they have that flexibility as well. So that's 2025. And as Charlotte mentioned, we are actively gearing up for 2026 as we speak. So this year, we very much want to focus and explore on, is Lincoln ready to change, or ready for change even? And what do people want to see? So it's understanding their perspectives of change. Who do they feel is responsible for that? And do they themselves feel that they can create change? So really wanting to understand what those barriers are. And, if those barriers weren't there, what next? So we're looking to launch this in the coming months. And this year, we're looking to expand our stakeholder network and also have more printed materials like posters and leaflets that people can use to clearly direct them and get kind of more information as well. So all of these reports are available online. I believe Charlotte has or can circulate a link, and there is kind of a landing page available with the key takeaways and the full reports as well. So they'll just provide even more detail to kind of what I've been over. So just to finish off, there've been a couple of key learnings throughout doing the big conversation that we've tried to respond to year on year. And as Charlotte mentioned, we're all about learning and thinking about how we can continually do better for communities. The first learning we found is, as you may have seen, that decreased engagement with the survey. So as Charlotte mentioned, this reflects a level of fatigue that we're seeing with that consultation. And it's great because we're at a point where increasingly organisations are seeing the value and importance of engaging people first and taking that do with rather than do to approach. However, if there's not feedback after that and that element of letting people know what this has led to, what's happened as a result, then they don't feel valued. They feel like they've just given a lot of their experience and that's been taken with nothing back. So to explore how we can increase that engagement, as Charlotte mentioned, we're trialling what difference it makes to launch a survey at different parts of the year, using different channels and varied messages. So every year we've tried something new with that. And going forwards, we're continuing considering how we can keep building a positive feedback loop. So how we can keep going back to people who've responded to the big conversation to say, this is what your contribution has helped build. This is what we've done. Here are some of the findings. You can read more about this here. That kind of approach. So people do feel heard and valued, and that it's not just research for research's sake. And then secondly, accessibility. So the survey is available online and printedly as well. And it's also been available in around 10 languages, but that's not always meant engagement. And as I've been known to say by my colleagues is, just because you build it does not mean they will come. And this could be for a range of reasons. So for example, people might not write in their main language, or they might not trust where the surveys come from, or simply not really trust the channels that it's come through. So in terms of how we're learning, again, it's that experiment with different approaches, but really looking at how we can meet people where they're at. So using trusted local messengers and that local stakeholder network to really push the survey out there, promote its value and how it is an interaction, aimed to be an interactional piece rather than a done to piece. And very much providing the means, whether it's through giving the survey to complete, supporting them to complete it, or just having an informal conversation that they can then let us know kind of what kind of discussions were had. Any of that are all approaches that we are welcoming continuously going forward so that we can allow people to engage in a way that matters to them and is meaningful for them. So, of course, this will all be trialled into 2026. So that brings to the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. As I say, the big conversation reports are all available if anyone would like to look at those further. I'll let you kind of round us off, Charlotte.
First of all, are there any questions that are burning from anybody? If they would like to pop them in the chat in the next few minutes, we'll try and answer them with the next few minutes that we've got left of the webinar. Thank you, Daisy. Obviously, we meet regularly and we touch base regularly. And just to kind of say that I mentioned briefly that this is part of a series of activities that happens under LocalMotion around continuous listening. So we do have some community researchers, and there's a very interesting piece of learning that we're doing around that at the moment as that kind of reaches its third birthday and what we've learned through that process. Specifically with the 2025 conversation, Daisy and the team have been really good at really delving down deep into some of the data and who's responded from what area and where we still have some gaps. And then we're looking at how do we work with community researchers to fill those gaps and engage with those people and those groups in a different way. But we're also kind of going out and saying to people, if you've got an existing community event and you need some money for it, we will support you in that in response, if you know, in return, if you help us get some responses back for the big conversation 2026. Interestingly enough, nobody's put their name forward, and even after some really direct conversations about we can resource this for you and you can be as creative as you know as you want. Actually, what we're learning is that money might not necessarily be the barrier. And I think sometimes when we talk about payment for participation, we presume that the money is the barrier. And actually what we're learning at the moment initially is that money isn't. We also did have in 2025 our Lincoln Horizons newspaper, like comic newspaper, that went out to 41,000 households. And that didn't drive the engagement for this particular piece itself. But interestingly, it did for many others. So we had quite a few people come forward that wanted to be community researchers or wanted to know what we're doing around young people or were really keen on the stuff we were doing around poverty. But for this, there just seems to be this kind of reluctance at the moment and this relationship mistrust maybe between these sorts of engagements. And so we're really trying to see how we can do that differently. I'm just going to read Paul's question out, if that's okay, if we want to round up there. So in 2023 and 2024, one of the key takeaways was the desire to have community space. This didn't feature in 2025. Is there a reason for this? For example, community space became available. The conversation around community space is ongoing for everybody. In Lincoln, there are around 37 different community spaces. Through the work that we've been doing with our Poverty Truth Commission, they identified 4 things that were holding communities back from their perspective. And one of them was, they called it something like central points of contact or one-stop shop. Where do you go for information when you need it? And there is a lot of misinformation out there, or people just didn't know where to go. And there was a whole series of things that we kind of unpicked. We are currently working with a more targeted, they've come forward and identified themselves as a bit more of a proactive group within that 37 community spaces in and around Lincoln. We've probably got about 8 or 9 people on a steering group, and we're responding to that by helping them develop a community hub network. That's been very interesting because they really wanted to focus on identity and governance so they could share information. The governance has happened, and yet still there's this reluctance to kind of sign on the dotted line and be part of an information sharing agreement. So there's just some wider learning there, which probably goes back to trust, not because they don't like each other, but I think there's a nervousness around the different levels of let's say standards and quality and relationships and things within those hubs. For young people, we are looking at how we can support young people to find a space, because there is I think, which mirrors what's happening across the rest of the UK. There is a lack of youth space, safe youth space in the city, and that's being really felt by the young people. And interestingly enough, that we are supporting another, well, 2 organisations actually to find new homes as well. So there's things that we are learning that we're picking up on in like different kind of strands, to be driven by those individuals. So we're not doing it for them, but how do we support the network and the infrastructure and stuff and things around them to enable it to happen? But community space is a massive ongoing conversation. Anything from you, Daisy, around that?
No, I was just going to say, I think community spaces is always there. That need to find a community space that works for me kind of aspect. I think in 2025 it more came out in that impact of opportunities to connect and thinking about what facilities there are. And for some people who, for example, the community hubs, they're very aware of what they are, they go to them regularly, they have their spaces. But then for those who are less aware or feel that they might struggle to get to them, for example, for transport reasons, that where it becomes perhaps more of an issue and more need for support there. So it is kind of underlying there. It's more that opportunity for spaces to connect generally, that continues to be there.
I hope that answers your question, Paul. Just going to Matty. There's a lot of conversation still locally which is connected with political scepticism and scepticism of people in positions of authority in Lincoln. How can research from the big conversation help us move towards building trust and challenging stereotypes? That probably goes a little bit into the culture side of things, Daisy, and I'll let you kind of come in. But also part of the reason I think, Matty, that we're looking at the next theme, which is around, is Lincoln ready for change? Because we talk about change a lot, but do we ever actually ask if it's what people want, or how they go about change? How empowered do they feel to do that? So I think there's some wider learning that we need to do around that. I don't think personally that the big conversation on its own is a tool to challenge stereotypes and build trust. I think that's the stuff that we take from the learning that then we build elsewhere. But that's just my perception. Daisy, anything from you?
I think the big conversation helps in that it's highlighted the importance of those trusted messengers. I think if you're going to build trust and challenge stereotypes, it's first going, as mentioned, where people are at, who they trust, so that you're not coming in as a completely separate entity, suggesting something completely that they're unfamiliar with, but actually using those key community figures who have that trust to help them almost extend that and then help change those perspectives where needed. I think the big conversation, like I said, Charlotte, provides that indication of what might be out there that we need to look more into and perhaps where they go for who they trust. And then I think that can be built as a bit of a strategy almost to help mitigate that.
There's a bit of a follow-on one from Matty as well, where she just kind of says, also looking forward to the pub's informal conversation experiment we're hoping to do this year. Just to say, Matty, that nobody's actually put their name forward for that yet. It was an idea that was championed in a workshop that we had, but then actually when we turned around to say who would like to do it, nobody put their name up, their hand up. So just something there, I think, about how we talk about what we need to do, and then what I'm willing to do or what I can do. And I think that kind of goes a little bit onto Sue's point as well. These insights highlight the need to strengthen social connection. Perhaps perhaps that is the reason there have been no takers to host up local events and opportunities. Yes, I think you're probably right, Sue. So the perception is that, you know, the finance or the resource and stuff is the barrier. I think it probably isn't, because we've offered to take that barrier away for people, and there's still a cautiousness and a nervousness from people. I think at the moment, at least. I don't know, maybe as we start to get into spring and we're a bit more hopeful, maybe people will come forward. That's what I'm kind of hoping. But at the moment, I think there is, I think people get worried that we live in a world where if you stick your head above the parapet and you get it wrong, you're very open to scrutiny. And I think people in communities feel physically and mentally full themselves and aren't necessarily resilient enough or strong enough at the moment to put their head above that parapet. That's just my understanding of it. Daisy, what do you think?
I agree. I think next year is going to be all about the let's take all those barriers away, what's next, and trying to get really to the core of that issue. And I think if the reason is I just simply can't do that right now, I just simply don't have the mental bandwidth, I don't have the capacity, then that's absolutely fine. I think it is having that honest conversation to say that's it's okay to say that. That's not a problem. It's good to know. So we know what kind of barriers we can help with and how we can kind of support as well. But also, yes, that element of connection and trust. And I think with the big conversation 2025, it's massively shown people are increasingly concerned about tensions and disconnection in the social community. So there is that worry of if they went out and did something, it wouldn't be met with loads of positive feedback. So I think that in itself is a little bit of barrier, but it is something that will be really interesting to explore this year.
Paul's just said that's a really interesting challenge to LocalMotion when the community raises its voice but doesn't want to lead. I think, Paul, listening to and thinking about the conversations we've had as a LocalMotion network, I think that's probably mirrored throughout. And the slight kind of add-on to that, I suppose, is there's a narrative that exists that we need to raise aspirations of communities, and we even talk about community-led aspiration in Lincoln. On the times that aspirations, communities are aspirational and they do want to lead, the systems tend to then be the blockers for a whole host of reasons. And if anybody's ever looked at the We're Right Here campaign and their Museum of Broken Dreams, they very much depict some of the stories where the system has been the barrier, not the aspiration of community. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And I really look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.